Today I had my first formal press conference as the Messiah. I was very pleased, even though I didn't do a lot of work for the press conference, that Sky TV and Radio 4 turned up, including John Ronson, the famous conspiracy buff stroke skeptic. It was a very strange day, though, because I found myself being sort of barracked, really, by a couple of members of the 9/11 Truth movement. And I've given my life to 9/11 Truth for over 2 years for no pay, for at times, again, more attacks in the press, abuse from people on the street occasionally. Now, I wouldn't understand why people would want to do that at my press conference. I would never dream of going to one of their press conferences and standing up and down trying to distract attention. So I asked those people to look in their own hearts and see where they are motivated by human ego. That was not an act of love, it was an act of selfishness. And I'd hope those people would have the wisdom and the self-knowledge in their hearts to repent over those things, to clear the slate, because otherwise God will punish them. The reason we do not judge and punish others is because we don't see the full picture, but God does, and his justice is sublime. And so you have nothing to fear from that, because God is the great compassion, and compassion means to feel with. So he's a disincarnate entity who has no free will. He's like a machine that dispenses pure, sublime justice. He can do nothing else. As I say, therefore, if you have love in your heart, he will give you love back because he feels with you. But if you feel hatred in your heart, or you're motivated by selfishness and human egos and jealousies, he will give you that back in spades, and you'll find your life becoming more and more isolated and more difficult to deal with. Now, of course, as the final incarnate of Yeshua, I'm particularly connected to the compassion, and therefore those who help Yeshua will be rewarded with light. Those who try to obstruct Yeshua will be punished by the universe. And I say that not because I set it up like that, I say that's because of how it is, and I have to warn you of that. And of course, the long time I've been here, one of the reasons I incarnate here is to partly, through me and the Yeshua Spirit, is to actually shield man from some of the justice of God, because we have been through a very dark period recently. We think about events like 9/11 and other false flag terrorist attacks. When we think about the world wars of the 20th century, which cost tens of millions of lives, all of that has led to darkness. And we are responsible for that. We can't blame God, we have free will. And I say, there is karma that comes back from that, because people who are involved in those conflicts will have reincarnated and be here again. So again, you have to look at what you've done in this life and hopefully try to meditate and look at what you've done in past lives to clear it all out. My past life journey was certainly, for me, the final piece of the jigsaw. And when I was taken to a crop circle, which had a chessboard very similar to one I'd painted when I was younger, when I was there in that chessboard, I was meditating. I looked up and I saw a plane with a rosy cross on the side. That's a symbol of the Messiah. This was clearly telling me there were other people out there who knew what was going on. And after that I sat down and I realised in my heart at that moment that I'd never had that sense of peace. I realised that that had been the missing part of my life, that I was the Messiah. All that went before now made sense. All that was to come was simple. I had a mission, and that was to teach humanity. So I have become happier as a result of this. I'm sure that people will see, just looking at me, that I'm in fine health, fine mental health, and all I aim to do out there is to get people to love each other more. But I do have one message that I would like to get out there to prove to people that I am the Messiah. I'd like to tell you that in fact the first person to walk on the moon was not Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin. That mission was actually faked. The details of this are scarcely beg a belief. They thought they weren't going to be able to get there by the end of the 60s, as Kennedy had said, so they were encouraged to fake it. But having done that, Apollo 12 then went to the moon. And someone called, I think it's Pete or Charles Conrad was the first man to walk on the moon. So I therefore call on Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, both of whom I know are believers in Jesus. And I would say to them that the incarnate of Jesus is talking to you now, and he's asking you both to set the record straight, because you cannot have the bad karma from an untruth like that attached to you at the time of ascension. It will stop you ascending because it will keep you in the lower vibrations. I'd also like to say Tony Blair, a man, since I became spiritual, who I've meditated probably more than any other individual. I've spent more time meditating unconditional love to him to try to get him to change his ways. And I'd like to think hopefully some of that love I've given him has actually kept him in his box and made him less likely to illegally invade other countries. Nevertheless, of course, the invasion of Iraq was a nightmare by anybody's standards. 1 million people have died as a result of that invasion. And obviously Tony Blair didn't pull the trigger to kill any of those people, but he made a decision to do so. And the universe says we must take responsibility for our actions. We don't blame other people or circumstances. And of course, crucially in his circumstance, he could have taken evidence that would have shown to him that this was a crazy idea. He could have taken that evidence from me, as a former MI5 officer who had some Iraqi expertise, who in fact said before the invasion that what would come to pass did, that it would be like another Vietnam and so on. So I call on Tony Blair as well, a man I know, I can see into his heart, needs absolution, needs to re-establish his contact with his emotional body. And again, I'm saying to him, the only way he can get absolution is to come and talk to me and confess to his sins and wipe the record straight. So thank you for listening to my first bulletin here as the Messiah on YouTube. I obviously know that people will be tempted to think I've gone mad. But the idea that the gods incarnate as human beings is not unusual in the Greek or Roman myths or in the Eastern myths. I have documentary evidence from documents dating from thousands of years that David Shayla is going to be the Messiah. Now when you put that together, again with somebody called David Shayla, who stood there for 10 years standing up for truth and justice with little concern for his own life or liberty or security, you can see that you have a man who is the Messiah. I know that in my heart, and I ask you to take the first steps towards believing that as well, because that is the surest way to be able to ascend to the new world. I'm not saying that you have to jump up and down in some hallelujah way and proclaim me the Messiah. What I'm saying is you must take the first step and say, well, if this guy is the Messiah, let's watch what he does. Let's listen to what he says. And let's try and put our faith in the justice of the universe. Let's suppose the universe is a just place and see how our lives unfold once we've done that. See how our lives will unfold if we actually, rather than getting angry with people or being jealous of people having more than us, that we step back and continue to project unconditional love to those people. Unconditional love to murderers, to rapists, to paedophiles, to people that we think the universe, or we think we can justly condemn. We can justly condemn no one because we don't see enough. So I thank you all for listening. I ask you all to find a space in your hearts to meditate over unconditional love. I ask you every day, if you can, to even just spend a few minutes, empty your mind of thoughts and focus on the heart. And if you do that, you'll take your first steps to becoming one of the immortals. Thank you.